All right, good morning, everybody, to our Executive Director Roundtable here with the Alliance. We are happy to have you here with us today and excited you could join us for an incredibly important conversation around executive directors who support individuals in really vulnerable, high-risk situations. Certainly in Mississippi and across the country and the world, there are a lot of people who serve people in need and in vulnerable situations. So I am sure that the words and insight that you hear today won't necessarily be entirely unique, but I think it's important to hear, and it's important to lift up the experiences of people who are in it every day, trying to support people who really need as much love and support as we can get them. So I want to thank everybody who is here today, who dedicates their lives to supporting others. It's an important part of how we support each other as fellow citizens and people and as a country. And so with that, I want to welcome our moderator, Lorena Lewis, and our three panelists, Diane Easley, Bianca Zaharescu, and Stan Buckley, from their respective organizations. Lorena is going to introduce them in just a moment, but I get to introduce Lorena, which I'm super excited about. So Lorena and I have known each other now for, gosh, 4 years, 3 years, something like that, Lorena. And Lorena is a fighter. She has been on the ground working tirelessly for years, trying to support communities who have been marginalized, who have been overlooked and ignored, and outright harmed, and has been an incredible advocate. Lorena is an organizer, activist, and public health professional with 20 years in public health, various leadership roles, and grassroots organizing experience. In her role as an organizer for the Industrial Areas Foundation, she helps to build statewide power for the underserved populations of Mississippi. Prior to her role as an organizer and executive director of the Immigrant Alliance for Justice and Equity, Lorena served for 2 years as executive director at the Lava Link, where she was responsible for helping restructure the board and grow the vision of the organization. Through these efforts, she secured contracts with Health Connect One and National Birth Equity Organization, reaching our sisters everywhere, and the Mississippi State Department of Health, through which she held the first statewide language access conference. As a result of the conference, she founded the Mississippi Language Access Coalition with over 20 members and partner organizations, including the Mississippi Center for Justice, Mississippi College, Millsaps, My Brother's Keeper, and UMC. Lorena worked at the Office of Health Disparities Elimination, where she served as Latino Outreach Coordinator and then Director of Outreach and Stakeholder Engagement. She is a Community Development Fellow with the Foundation for the Mid-South, has been part of the Language and Emergency Response cohort at the Praxis Project, was a Community Fellow for the MSDH, as well as a faculty for the Birth Equity Leadership Academy for Health Connect One. She is part of an interpreter cooperative and has been a doula for over 10 years, a certified lactation consultant and trainer. Lorena's heart is with the community and her work on growing and nurturing relationships on the grassroots level between Black and Brown communities, and as a means of healing justice is at the core of her work. She immigrated from Ecuador to Harlem as a child. She has a bachelor's in international relations and master's in teaching. Lorena is a proud mother of 3 brilliant and politically engaged Afro-Latinas. Lorena, thank you so much for being willing to moderate today's conversation. And for those of you who were with us before, and those of you who are new to the Executive Director Roundtable experience, this is meant to be a dialogue. It's a chance for us to listen to a conversation between these great leaders and the work they do and their perspectives. So I am excited to sit back and listen to this dialogue. There will be time for Q&A at the end, but for now, write your questions down or your comments down. But we're going to all sort of just sit back and enjoy this experience and really hearing an amazing dialogue. So With that, Lorena, thank you for doing this and for being here, and the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dave. Yeah, I think on the first conversation, I knew that I had to keep Dave close because he's just an amazing person. But thank you, everyone in attendance. I look forward to this conversation, getting to know Diane, Bianca, and Stan a little bit. But just a little bit about them before we begin the conversation. And our three panelists, Bianca, and please forgive me because I know folks make mistake with my name, but Zaharescu, is that? Okay. So Bianca, she's our Chief Financial Officer of the Spring Initiative in Clarksdale in Mississippi, and she co-founded the educational nonprofit in 2011 out of a deep sense for social justice, desire for racial reconciliation, believe in the power of education and relationships, and love for young people. A person after my own heart. A naturalized citizen, Bianca moved to the US from Romania when she was 2 years old. Bianca is a graduate of the University of Illinois, holding a Bachelor's of Arts in African American Business Studies and History. Bianca first came to Clarksdale in 2006, moving there for a gap year between high school and college in 2007. Today, her role as a Chief Financial Officer of Spring, Bianca shares responsibility for all organizational decisions with her co-founder, Anja Thiessen, Chief of Staff and Marketing, and the third leadership team member, Rachel Bauer, Director of Program and Student Success. Bianca is also the Director of College Spring, the program that supports Spring's original cohort of students who are now college sophomores, juniors, seniors, and new graduates. In her free time, Bianca enjoys music, eating, laughing, dancing, and the presence of family and friends. Bianca hopes to continue to help build Spring into an organization that can serve more young people even more effectively. Bianca's committed to being a true part of the Clarksdale community for the long run. So welcome, Bianca. And now Diane. Diane is the founder and executive director of the Community Care Network, CCN. She's a registered nurse who also holds a master's degree in administration. She has over 30 years of nonprofit management experience, including director of the women's program of the Home of Grace, service on a number of boards and agencies, and a dedication to prison ministry. And so I look forward to having this conversation, Diane, because we do some work with folks that are in detention. During her years of passion and service to women and children in her care, she saw an undeniable need for a safe place for them to call home. 18 years ago, through her vision, the help of a dedicated community, and God's guidance, Sue's Home was born. Today, Sue's Home continues to serve women and children who find themselves homeless for a variety of reasons. With her leadership, CCN was chosen in 2020 by HUD to spearhead an innovative homeless youth housing and life skills program. In her free time, Diane enjoys spending time with her husband, Wallace, her two boys, Mitch and Derek, and her 5 grandsons. And Stan, look forward to introducing Stan. And he is the founder and executive director of But God Ministries. He practiced law in Hattiesburg, Mississippi for 4 years before becoming a pastor in 1995. He served as a senior pastor of 3 churches over a 16-year period before starting But God Ministries in 2011. His education includes degrees from the University of Southern Mississippi, Mississippi College of Law, and New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. Stan has been married to Jewel since 1989, and they have twin sons and a daughter. So welcome everyone on the panel. We have a wonderful panel of folks that are interested in serving the community, the most vulnerable in Mississippi. And we know that we already are, as a state, a vulnerable state. So this is a conversation that definitely is close to my heart. So with that, I'd like to begin. In the conversation, we know that, as executive directors and leadership role, oftentimes people think that it could be glamorous, right? The face or the one where the press looks forward to give statements. But it's not all writing articles and all smiling in front of the camera. There's a lot of work that goes to leading and founding an organization. It's a work of the heart, as well as the paperwork, and oftentimes, we're working all day, Saturdays and Sundays. Stan is working, and he's in supposed to be spending some time relaxing, but that's just what happens when we take on this work. So with that, the first questions, and I like to we were talking about that this is a conversation over coffee, and just feel free to just chime in, and I'll follow along. I'll include myself in the flow of the conversation. But what are some obstacles that you face in becoming an ED, in that process to where you are now? And since we introduced Stan last, if we could begin with you, Stan. What were some obstacles that you faced on your way?
Well, the way I started, it was back in 2011, this was not in my introduction, but we do work in the country of Haiti with some of the poorest people in all the world, and then we do work in the Mississippi Delta as well. And we take a holistic approach to ministry. We do housing, education, access to clean water, clean food, medical care, all those sorts of things. We just kind of do them all at one time. And so when I started out, I was pastoring a church in downtown Jackson, Mississippi, and a guy asked me to go over to Haiti to see the devastation that had taken place after that. You may remember that horrible earthquake. And I went, and like a lot of you, when you see something, it was such incredible hopelessness and despair that I had never seen before, that I couldn't just do nothing. I couldn't come back home and just go on about my business. And so we began, I led the church to build a sustainable community there in Haiti, but it went so well so quickly that I left to do this work full time and form this organization. And some of the challenges just starting out, of course, was, I as you said, well, I was it. I was the lone guy. I was the lone person in the organization. So I was doing everything. From whatever fundraising was being done to the planning, the programming, the organizing. So that was a huge challenge. Now, fortunately, I like to work. And so, I was working, 60, 70 hours a week, just getting things going. Another big challenge I find when you're starting out is how you're going to handle the finances in a way that's appropriate, that's ethical, that's legal, where people can see and read and understand what you're doing. Somebody's got to keep up with all of that. Now, in full disclosure, I have to say it was a little odd the way we started out, because before I left, we took up a one-day offering at the church and raised about $500,000. So I understand that's different, that's unusual. Most people don't start that way. And so I just wanted to be honest and upfront about that. And so we were able to have that. But still, when I left that church, it was just me. And so I think the biggest challenges starting out were being the only one doing every single thing that had to be done from my home. I had no office, no nothing. And then how are we going to handle the finances, and how are we going to handle the growth that comes? And the big question starting out is, when do I expand? When do I bring on other staff? How do I know when the appropriate time is? Do we have the funding in place to do that? And so oftentimes the workload is there, but the funding is not. And we face that all the time now. We have a much larger, big staff now. But those are the biggest things we face, me being the only one. And how do you record? I mean, I told people I was a lawyer and a preacher, which means I really can't do anything. I don't have any skills. And so I was not an accountant. And so I didn't know how to keep up with the funds. But I do know if you don't handle those funds properly, it's over. You need to go find something else to do. Those funds need to be kept up with properly, and they need to be reported properly. So those are two biggies.
Yeah, and everything that you said resonates. Everything, that money, and being exact. People want to estimate when they give. Sometimes we give stipends, and I have to constantly remind, because I actually run a staff of about 25, but everybody's volunteer. And so because they're not getting paid, sometimes they feel, okay, well, we can give 80 instead of 67, right? And that really, really, and it's all on you, because your name is on the paperwork. Your name is on everything as you move towards that 501c3 status, because that's where we are right now. Bianca, what are some challenges that you face?
Yeah, so I guess if this is more sort of about becoming, I think I was thinking of two things. One, so we also, like, I was one of the co-founders, and I think the idea of starting something without a blueprint for it is like really freeing, is very exciting, right? You can make your own rules, but you also really don't know, like, you know, you're not following kind of someone else's direction of, okay, this is what it means to be, right, the leader of the organization. So I think one of the big challenges is just making sure you actually are doing all the different things, right? Like Dan, you know, pointed out about the accounting part, right? Just kind of somehow thinking of all these things as you're kind of creating it from scratch. I think that's one thing. I think the second thing I was going to say is, you know, so like I'm not from Mississippi. I'm like, you know, one of the leaders in a nonprofit that is working primarily with Black students because of how, right, the racist history of the state. And so therefore, right, it's a very racialized, like, kind of injustice that people are facing. We do have white students as well, right, who need the support as well. But obviously, right, like things are racialized in the state. And so but in general, even apart from just the race part, you know, I think the challenge, right, is like how to sort of create an organization that could be as much community led as possible when literally the leadership did not come actually out of that community, right? And it's not like, so I think that is just a challenge that in general, right, it would be, the ideal would be that every sort of leadership or most leadership roles in our organization, right, would be literally people from Clarksdale who are kind of creating, right, this organization kind of for themselves, and then, you know, with some partnership. But I think that is just kind of a challenge. Like, it was started by two of us who are not from Clarksdale. And so that, like, really trying really hard to intentionally partner as much as possible so that it is not kind of this thing where it's like, well, we just had this cool idea and we're doing it for people, but that it really could be like, even though we are outsiders, that we really are trying to make it be something where we are growing very slowly and like sort of at every step of the way really trying to get parent input and volunteer, like, and really build it sort of still from the ground up. I think that would be like the second main kind of challenge that I would say. And I think the third one is just like always balancing the logistics and kind of the logistics and like the heart of it, right? And like the big picture and the details. I think that's part of what always feels hardest about my job, is that it's like you are always, you know, having to really go between, like, you know, spending however long in QuickBooks, right? And working with a CPA, right? And like you said, being detailed about every single penny, and then immediately moving to like, what is the actual like purpose behind this, right? What's the goal? What's the heart? And kind of at any, you know, at any point being able to sort of balance both of those things. I think that would be, I would say, like kind of the third biggest challenge, like for me, is kind of seeing both of those things. You can't just be led by your spirit. You got to really be, you know, thinking.
Yeah.
But you also,
that is so well said. I appreciate the safe space too that Dave has created for us to speak so candidly, as you did, Bianca, because it's something that if you're not from Mississippi, you are seen as an outsider. And then there's also, especially with what's going on, in the state, where and as an organizer, one of the things that I do is build leaders, and so balance that executive director with the organizing piece where we are creating leadership in the community. So hopefully they can form organizations on their own. It's something that I struggled with, and talk about some of the obstacles. Just getting to an ED role as a person, as a brown person, that was super difficult, because a lot of times people already seem to see a brown person here because we don't fit in, You know, it's mostly it's binary, either black or white. Well, where does this person come from? What work has she done? Well, we've actually been working behind the scenes for the last 20, 25 years. But when we get to these leadership positions, people are wondering where did they pop up from? Because my feeling is that because I work strictly with the immigrant community, that our organization should be immigrant led. And so it was actually a struggle getting to this position. Even though I created the organization, there were still a lot of politics around what was going on. So thank you for sharing that, Bianca. Diane, what were some of the obstacles that you faced?
Actually, all of the above, plus the population that we work with. As in many marginalized populations, there's a stigma. A lot of our clients have dealt with or are dealing with addiction, incarceration, and sometimes that is viewed by the outside people that have never had to deal with that as a choice they made instead of a trauma that might have caused choices that they made. Or a lot of genetic things going on, or it is very easy. It's not a real glamorous thing to go out and speak about. I've kind of learned in some organizations that I have to even begin with, well, I know you want to help the children of these women and families, but you might not realize these women were the children of some of these people, and there was no one standing in the gap. And so the population that we work with aren't always viewed as marginalized. It's kind of like you just need to get your act together, and they don't. Sometimes even people that mean very, very well don't understand what the true needs of our organization are. You know, they may offer advice and help or mentoring that's not quite as appropriate as they think, but we have to be very careful because we don't want to turn people away. We want to introduce them to our population, but at the same time, we have to protect our population. And so there is a lot of privacy issues, and you know, bringing staff on board as we grow. We have to learn to work together and be cohesive. And I mean, I'm really blessed. I have the most incredible group of people around me that support what we do and support each other and are there for each other. And that's almost one of the biggest challenges to me as an executive director is because I just, you know, hit the floor running and get going. Sometimes I have to stop and remember that everybody I'm working with is bringing their things to work too. And we have to be here for each other in addition to our clients. I'm not always good at that because I'm just focused on getting the next task done. So I think it's a constant growth thing. As a director and as somebody that started an organization after working at other organizations, you just have to learn the skills and reach out just like we're doing today. And if I don't know how to do something, I've got to be willing to ask and say, you know, we've not had to tackle this before. Give me some assistance. What works for you? I'll tell you what works for me. It's a lot of sharing and also realizing that even though the buck stops with me, all the weight doesn't have to land on me.
Yeah, yeah.
Lorena, if I could, if I could say something about what was said earlier by you and Bianca, I greatly admire what you guys are doing in light of the fact that you are, as you said, outsiders to this state. We say at our office, Mississippi is a club, not a state. And that has some real negative, that can be very negative. And so, you know, so I admire you guys for what you're doing in light of not being here. And I would also say to any of us like me, I'm from here, okay? I grew up here, I'm from here, we know everybody across the state. we should take advantage of that in a good way, okay? And use those advantages to help the people of our state who are hurting and who are struggling. Instead of just using that for our own good, we need to take advantage of those connections, those abilities, and introduce people who may not be from here. And so that they can have access to the people and to the things and to the resources that are available here. And so it is a struggle. And I've said, you could even be from Alabama and you're not from here. That's how sad it is. And you know, and you know, where I've served before, where we had different staff come in and they weren't from this area, because every conversation in Mississippi seems to go the same way. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from Brookhaven. Oh, well, my mother, you know, she married that Smith boy who went to Mississippi State. Yeah, yeah. And you run down kinfolk. And so when you don't have access to that, then that can make things, I assume it makes trust harder. So, but when they can run your kinfolk down and know you from Brookhaven and your mama went to Mississippi State with my cousin, well, then you're okay. I can trust you. And so, unfortunately, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, and that takes us to actually the obstacles at the moment, right? Like, what are some obstacles? And that is one. I'm entering space where I'm dealing with an attorney that, you know, knows everyone in the state. He's actually known nationally, and he's like, who are you? You know, what school did you go to? And, you know, I actually have to find that relationship. So this is where the organizer takes over in me, because I have built relationships throughout the state, but I have to maneuver these spaces where even to get an appointment with someone, you know, where they're saying, well, let me have a beer with this person to get you the appointment, where really I'll just pick up the phone and I feel comfortable to call, you know, anyone, you know, a senator, whatever but folks here feel, let me have a beer let me talk to you about this Lorena coming in here. And so that is one of the obstacles. Anything else that you guys think about obstacles right now? For me too, is the funding, the fundraising, because our work, Bianca, is so grassroots, where the last couple of years, we've been building one-on-one relationships, because my goal, or our goal as an organization, is that all the folks that we're touching are leaders. We're creating leaders as organizers. And so it was very slow work. Also identifying folks that actually want to take on some roles, right? For example, now we have a cultural organizer, we have a youth organizer now, and this is one of the young people that was just coming along. Now we have a deputy director. She was volunteering, she was running the entire volunteer organization, you know. So how do you build this person that has the desire, doesn't necessarily have the leadership skills, but you know that this is another immigrant or child of immigrants that could be doing the same thing. You know, how do you empower folks? So that has been a challenge, because of, again, the perception of immigrants and brown people, indigenous people. We have some indigenous leaders that speak 3 languages, but we see their humble disposition and we assume this person must be ignorant. You know, we equate poverty with stupidity. And some of our most amazing, and if we think about what it's like in their countries, you know, they have to be very politically engaged, very just savvy and knowledgeable of what's going on around them. So these are very well educated in their own way, folks that have fled their countries to seek protection here. But the perception of them, because they're wearing their garb from their home, they don't speak English, they don't speak Spanish, but they're learning English. So some of the folks that we work with speak 4 languages, 4, yet they still are looked down upon, right? From folks that barely speak 1 language. And so that's an obstacle, creating that leadership within the community and then getting funding. You know, how do you work that vision into the programs that funders want to see? You got to package that, you know, in a way that's acceptable to the funders. So that anything else that comes to mind, Diane, before we move on?
Well, when you were talking funding, that's what woke me up in the middle of the night last night, because that's what executive directors do is, you know, we are opening a new facility actually right now as we speak We have a young mother and a baby that were homeless, and I have a staff member picking her up and taking her to our second home that we've just opened for them. And we've spent the last month getting it ready and putting in beds and food and everything. It was just an empty shell, and now it's a beautiful home. But then yesterday I heard that one of our primary funders, because of various situations, has let us know, yes, you have funding that is coming, but it may be 2 months late. But we also at the same time, and
Yeah.
I just hired 4 part-time staff because you can't have a client there at the house and other clients coming without having people there 24 hours. So, you know, it's just something you have to deal with and realize there is an answer. As a faith-based agency, I just have to remind myself, God's got this. I just need sometimes letters written to tell me exactly. I know that funding will come, but in the meantime, we are having to cover thousands of dollars that we expected to start October 1. And so those, you know, that kind of news happens. You have to make adjustments and you have to prepare for it. It's a matter of now going and speaking to some people that we've begun to establish relationships. But, you know, you have to be very careful when you talk to people about funding that it doesn't look like you're begging or you might not make it, because we know we will. So there's that kind of dance among those little raindrops of doing that. But I mean, as we speak, we've just added staff, added a client, taking on new, and then received news. So it's a lot of balls that you're juggling at the same time, while with this new facility, as in many agencies, when things change, we now have a new staff that has to learn to gel and work together, and they don't all know each other. So there will be personalities coming in, and so, you know, part of my job is going to be helping them navigate and learn that they won't all communicate the same way, and at the same time being role models for a homeless young woman who is struggling herself. And I think we have a couple of pregnant teenagers coming within the next week or two, possibly. So it's just you rise to the challenge that presents itself that day, and then you surround yourself with people that, while you're over here taking care of this, you know that they are taking care of the other things.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Lorena, if I could say something, Lorena, on that funding, you know, to me as executive director, one of the biggest challenges, of course, is fundraising. And the question for us has become, how do we create ongoing sustainable funding? And so that we're not constantly reaching out, hoping to get a little something here and a little something there. One thing we've done is we've created what we call the Circle of Hope. And so that's those who give $100 a month. And so, because we had a pretty decent base, we've got 120 people who are now in our Circle of Hope, and that's general fund money. Because that's the key. Because everybody likes to designate, and so for us, we built 170 houses in Haiti. We build them for about $5,800 a month. Well, people love to build a house, right? But that doesn't pay our rent in Richmond, and that doesn't pay my accountant's salary, and that doesn't pay the electricity. Okay, or they like to there's just a million things that we do with our medical clinics and our dental clinics and all the things we do. So then we've realized, like, great, we've got 120 people in Circle of Hope, but a lot of folks can't give $100 a month. They're not going to do that. Yeah. So next month in October, we're rolling out the Givers of Hope, and that's going to be $50 and below. And I'm going to send out 5,000 letters to our support base. And if we could get, 100 more people, well, that ends up being significant resources. So we could end up, if you got 120 people in the Circle of Hope, just start doing the math, right? That's a $12,000 a month. So that's going to come in, and they get it automatically on their, it's usually on their credit card or whatever, or it's being automatic withdrawal. That's coming in every single month. We can count on those funds. And then if we can do that, then whenever, like we're about in Jonestown, which is near Bianca in Coahoma County, like next year we're going to build a big community center. Okay, this thing will probably cost several $100,000, but I can then focus my energy on raising those funds because I know our general fund money is coming in. And one other thing I would say about fundraising, one thing I've discovered over the years is one way we raise money is by not raising money. And what I mean by that is I send out the best thing we ever did. Once a month, I send out a newsletter. It's always upbeat and positive, listing the great things that are happening. And I don't ask for a thing. All right, don't ask, except, you know, the last paragraph, hey, if you want to give. But so month after month, they know what's going on. They know the successes that we're having. And as Diane mentioned, I think you need to come from a position of strength. I had a person of great means told me one day, Stan, people with money, they don't want to give to prop something up. They want to be a part of something that's happening. They want to be a part of something that's making a difference. So every month I'm popping out and not a lot of text. Nobody's going to read 22 paragraphs, single space that I wrote. All right, so I get pictures of the latest house, pictures of the medical clinic and patients, pictures in Jonestown, Mississippi, the lady who's got the new set of dentures. And so I'm putting all those on there so that when that month comes and I need to ask for something, that shoot, I'm going to give to this group. They're doing something. And so those are just some thoughts on fundraising.
No, those are some great, actually, great advice. I'm taking notes as a newly founded organization. It's tied to a challenge because we don't have those deep roots that you have, but also
Right.
It's something that we can work on, right? And we can work with folks that do have the deep roots and connections. But those are any other advices here. That's part of our questions. Any other advice that you have to share with us?
I would just add, sorry.
Mhm.
I was just gonna say, I think, like, really trying to find ways to specifically capture kind of what your organization brings to the table that might be different, like not in a way of putting other organizations down, but to really paint that vision of like, what is unique about this? So for spring, for example, one of our biggest challenges is we have 2 full-time staff members for every 16 students. And it's a long-term commitment. So when a student is in our program, we are committed to them to like through the end of high school into and then through the end of college. So it's like a long-term, commitment. And if you're paying, right, like 2 full-time people just for 16 kids, right, we have a lot of people who are like, that is not the most efficient use of funds, right? Can you get 25 kids in that group? And for us, what we're saying is like, because of like, we are targeting the students who are like the most behind, who are in general, like who their parents, their family members, counselors, youth court is referring as having some of the highest challenges they're facing. And those are the same students who we know like are the future leaders, right? Like that in different ways, right? That it's not just about like, sure, like, can they survive? Can they get like a job? Like, can they really, like, they have so much to offer the world, right? The world is missing out without every one of them. But like that takes intensive commitment, and it looks different than if we were working with students, right, who are already pretty self-motivated, and we're going to help like propel them, by like just helping them access resources, which is still very valuable work, right? But I think we have tried to get as good as possible about explaining what is it specifically, like it's just, your money, what is it really doing, and why is the way that our organization is set up, why is it unique, and why is it working for our students, right, or for our families? And so I think that, like, when we do write grants, right, we're not trying to promise, like, the whole thing is based on individuality. It's based on an individual student, right, regardless of all the trauma they may be facing, that they can thrive and they can choose their path. So we are not going to write a grant promising that those students, right, are going to all, let's say, get a certain type of job, right, or enter a certain career, because the whole point is they have choice. And we don't know if they're going to want that or not, right? So, like, I think when in thinking about that tie between funding and programming, I think we've really learned to try to be as kind of not honest as opposed to dishonest, right? It's not like we were dishonest at some point, but like honest in the sense of really being like, what is realistic, right? And if we know we're working with students, right, who may or may not decide, right, like they have free choice, we can't promise outcomes, certain outcomes necessarily, but we can promise others. And like, we can try to tell the story of how that is the whole point, is that we want our students, right, to be able to choose their path, right? We want them to be prepared for college, but we also know that there's some of them, even if they get into Mississippi State, they may still prefer to go to, you know, the local community college. And so kind of trying to like, yeah, I guess just really like, even when you're talking to funders, just be really rooted in like what's real on the ground, right? Like, how does that, because, you know, like,
That's
just,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Bianca.
Lorena,
Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple of things that I found helpful on funding that others may. One thing, if somebody gives something to us, they're gonna get a picture of it real soon. And so if they build a house, we recently built 22 houses in Haiti. Well, I have a list of all those that we can't be there because of COVID and the unrest. But I have a list of everybody who's given. Well, I send them a picture of the family living in a mud hut in horrible circumstances, and they can see the families were faith-based, so they can pray for the family and all of that. And then when that house is built 10 to 15 days later, I immediately send them a picture of that family standing in front of that house. I have a funder a lady out of California. She gives all the time. She'll give a bus. Well, the next thing she's going to see is me sitting in that bus. And I had a guy of significant means out of Texas told me, Stan, I appreciate the way you raise money. He said, because here's what happens a lot of times. He said, a nonprofit, you'll give some money, and either number one, you never hear what happened to your money. You don't know what happened, or number two, they'll call you every day of the week after that. I said, well, I don't have time to call you every day. But it's amazing how we are so huge and big on, if somebody gives money for something, we're gonna give them pictures. The second thing I would say is we found it very helpful. You talked about earlier, Lorena, picking up the phone and calling this person, that person. That's great. We found when we make those connections, for us, particularly like Georgia Tech, they do a lot of work with us in Haiti. They're one of the top engineering schools in the world. Well, they've sent 25 people. They've made one of our big compounds completely solar powered. Well, I use that connection all the time when I'm talking particular to secular organizations or group, right? Because that gives credibility. Oh, we're working with Georgia Tech. And then we also work with Auburn. And then there's a huge construction company out of Birmingham called Brassfield and Gorey. In fact, they're doing the Children's Hospital at UMC, and they build stuff all over the country. Well, we do a lot of stuff with them. So to connect with them and say, hey, you know, we're working with Brassfield and Gorey. They're one of our partners. And I found that using those, and I say that in a positive way, whether it should or not, doesn't matter. It gives us credibility in the eyes of a lot of people. And again, it doesn't really matter.
I'm gonna call you after this meeting, Stan, to get a lot of good pointers. But that actually, those are all very helpful, you know, because a lot of people do want to see what's happening with their money. But we are working directly with the vulnerable population, right? And so we talked about the paperwork and the funding, but these are human beings, right? Human beings that are suffering. And they are in pain and they have incredible trauma. So already things are difficult here in the times of COVID. But then, you know, there's a lot of negative rhetoric. So they carry that, you know, in their body. You know, they have to live with entering a store and people thinking that they're going to steal something because they look a certain way, right? I have a brilliant child that, you know, she has this face and she looks angry. Who I don't know. She might, you know, have to live with the thought that people might think that she wants to fight just because she's Afro. She's an Afro Latina. So there's each person that we're working with has a whole world of trauma and emotional that we absorb because we're working with folks, and we absorb. We're trying to create situations where, as you mentioned, Stan, things are sustainable, not just for the organization, but for the folks that we're working with. We want this work to last when we're gone, right? When that's how we. So with these things, also that we carry, what are some things that you do to help you manage that? Because that's you know, that's emotional labor that we're putting in. So I want to get started with this, and this, it's a little bit, and as you notice, oftentimes I find myself being the only person that looks like me in the room. And I'm Latina. I'm actually from Ecuador. You know, I grew up in Harlem. So I have a little bit of my culture is a little bit different than Latinos, even in Mississippi. So for me to recharge, I have a group of Latinas that are doing great things. One is editor for the Times, one is this, where I just want to talk to them and kind of just touch them. And that just fills me, you know, because they understand that they're, you know, what we went through growing up, going through some great schools, but not having the opportunity to make it to an Ivy League school. I actually had that opportunity, but I didn't know better because I was the first one navigating the educational system, right? And so those kind of things we talk about, the things that we, as immigrants, as brown women, as women, you know, that we are, and that fills me, and that just gives me energy to keep going. And then also talking to the community, because even though I think I have it rough, if I just talk to someone who tells me that when they were 60 years old, they walked the last couple of miles barefoot and pregnant so that their daughter can have what she didn't have, I know that my life is a breeze. So getting these one-on-one conversations with the community, and realizing what amazing and resilient people that I'm working with is what fills me. So what are some things that, you know, that fill you, that help you emotionally, you know, keep going? Because yeah, we're working hard, not just physically, but you know, our heart is going into this work.
I think for me, one of the things is, and it doesn't always happen and it doesn't always work, because there's some days you just flat out crash and burn. And I think we have to be honest with each other about that. But I think part of it is the mindset. We talk about it as a staff. We don't take credit for the clients that make it. And then we try to not beat ourselves up about the ones that don't, because we are working with a vulnerable population that have dealt with trauma. Sometimes we don't, and we don't have quick success stories. We're on a long-term journey with them, and sometimes they may fall down 2 or 3 times during that journey, and we have to know that they have to know that we will be there for them, but we also have to set boundaries, because it's not our job to fix someone, especially if they're dealing with addiction and other issues. So it's a matter of a mindset of realizing there has to be some boundaries. We don't take it on, and sometimes we have to, as a staff, be able to be real honest with each other. You know, I tell our group all the time, we really don't have the right to like or not like the way a person is acting. That is not who we are. Our responsibility is to minister to them and to be there for them, and they may not accept that help. And there are sometimes people outside of what we do that don't understand that. We formed a group, and I've missed it because with COVID, we haven't been able to get together. We have a small group on the coast of executive directors, and we just decided we need to get together every month or so and say some things that we may not even talk about with all of the staff, but with each other. We named ourselves Executive Directors Anonymous, because it kind of turned into a support meeting, you know. But we even, and I will be, you know, I'm gonna be real transparent and honest, even when I'm dealing with people in some churches and congregations, I'm dealing with life and death situations at times. And I really sometimes am not interested in hearing the superficial chit chat. And I have to be careful, because I also need that infilling of being around people. But sometimes it isn't really what I need. So I'm finding I'm just, again, I am blessed to have a team. It's not my staff, it's a team of people that I can be vulnerable to, and that we can lift, you know, somebody's having a bad day, they really can come in and go, I'm having a bad day, and, you know, I need a little bit of extra grace here. And so I think we have to be able to have people we can surround ourselves with, and be able to draw strength from them in a lot of ways, because there are times that we're mentally exhausted and emotionally exhausted because of the things we see and the things we do, and that does make it difficult.
Yeah, we can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Mm-mm.
So that's what I'm always reminded. Stop and take, you know, take some time for yourself. That is super, super important.
And
to do,
I'm not good at that, because
Yeah.
there's tasks to be done. And also, I think too, when you're the founder and you started out alone, doing a little of everything, delegation is not hard. It's not that you don't know 100% they can do it. You just go on automatic pilot and do it yourself. And so I've got a great staff that will call me and go, that's my job now.
Yeah.
And that's good.
So
Lorena,
culture, culture of accountability, it's super important to build within your staff, where people feel comfortable.
Lorena,
Yeah. Go ahead. Yes, Dan, please.
oh, I'm sorry. Oh, well, I was just going to say, as far as emotional toll, one thing that I do is like where I am right now in this cabin, you know, about once a year, just to get away from everything, just totally physically remove myself, because I mean, I'm doing this, but I actually have been doing some work this week, which I shouldn't be doing, but I just love the work. But also for me, it's, my wife and I have a group of friends that we get together with socially that has nothing to do with But God Ministries, because my whole life is consumed with But God Ministries. These are people, you know, who have different jobs, who frankly don't even invest in our work. I mean, they don't really have anything to do with it, although they're close friends of mine. But getting with them and talking about something other than what I normally talk about 24/7, I found that to be enormously helpful, and just to get away from it, and then also to do something else that requires my time. I teach a class in my church. There's a life group, what we might call a Sunday school. There's about 100 adults that come. Well, I know this coming Sunday I'm going to teach that class, and it has nothing to do with But God Ministries, but I get to stand up in front of them and pour my heart out and share what I feel I'm supposed to be sharing that day. And again, it's just something different from what I do 24/7 otherwise. So those are some things that help me recharge.
Thank you, Stan. Bianca, what are some things that you do?
So I wanted to first, because it's related, but I have one more thought I wanted to say about the funding part, if that's okay. Like, so not like in contradiction to what you said, Stan, but kind of like almost like, well, basically I was going to say that I think, like for us, for example, we have not been able, like we have chosen that we can't really do kind of what you said about the idea of like showing a before and after picture, because of like, there's technically stories we could say, right? We could technically tell people, look, we have people who are attending college now who were like shot in the head, who have like blah, 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 right? This student has gone through this and this and this. Now this is what their tuition costs, right? Can you help with that? But then like just that student, right? They don't want, they like, that's not what they want out there, right? That's not what feels good. Like, and also if that student then decides next semester, hey, I actually don't want to go to college anymore. Like, maybe they don't get great grades, right? Maybe they decide to drop out. So I think kind of like, almost like with what I was saying about like kind of knowing your unique place as an organization, right? Because I think there are some where it might be more straightforward, where like, and you could do that, but I think it's really important to, like for us, I think that it has been really important to not really do that and not be like pitching this much to help this exact student, because then it's like, if that donor is, you know, again, that student, it's like Diane was saying, like it can go up, it can go down, it can go like, you don't know. And then, and just for them, right? Like, cause we've had a few times, like we've put stuff up and then students or families were like, that rubbed me the wrong way. Like, what do you mean I'm at risk? Like, what does that mean? And we like really changed our language, and we really tried to like, and at this point, any pamphlets we do, like we have like our college students or our high school students like read it and be like, does this ring true? Like, yes, we want to, you know, address the obstacles, but we don't want to be like, oh, look, here's everything, right? Like, yeah. So I just kind of want to.
That makes so much sense. I think that makes so much sense. You know, we found, you know, in Haiti it's easy to do because a lot of the people we put on, they live in the mountains with no electricity, no running water. They're never going to see anything we see. Nobody, anything we ever put out, no one will ever know them because they're in the mountains of Haiti with nothing. But when we got to the States, what you described, that's different. People don't want to be seen as less than. They don't want to be seen as a charity case. And so we've had to learn those exact lessons that you're talking about, Bianca, and learn to somehow do that in a different way. But you're right on.
Yeah, and I think for me, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say creating that culture of accountability with the folks that you're serving too, because our entire board is made up of you know, immigrants and folks like, you know, brown and black folks that kind of have had this experience. So that helps us too.
And I think for me, that's honestly tied to the self-care part. I think like a little bit, like Diane kind of touched on this, and I think Lorena, you did too, but the idea of like our staff, of course it's hard, right? But literally it is like enjoyable. It is like the most, right? It's like, we feel lucky to get to literally get paid to do this kind of work. Like, and so I think, again, the more we try to get away from, and like the way we talk about it with our staff and with our students, right, to get away from like the savior, I don't think we need to get away from it. I think we frankly, like, that's one of the main things we try to, like, whenever we have someone join the staff, it's like, if that's what you're in here for, if you really think you're here to like help these poor people or whatever, like you literally have no business on this staff. Like, you know, it's like we are like all the same type of like we are all human, right? And then these systematic circumstances have made some people's lives way, way, way harder. But I think that takes off that like kind of, it's painful, right? It's like if you love someone, it is incredibly painful when they are going through difficult stuff. But I think we really try to frame it more like, also, I mean, yeah, it's not like it's on you to change someone's circumstances, right? It is literally like we together are here, and what we are committing to is showing up consistently, and then together trying to problem solve and expand opportunities and access resources and try to rectify some of the things that are not right in this, you know, in this sphere. And I think like the enjoyment part and the just like reminding ourselves, like, it's like, yeah, like people are brilliant. It's like an honor to get to work together. And then I think really encouraging our staff also to be like, yeah, when you know, to give more personal days, to try to encourage them to take their personal days, to like, I think just that part of like, you as a person, you're neither above nor are you below and supposed to be just serving the people we're working with, right? Like if you care about the students' well-being, if you care about the family's well-being, you have to care about your well-being too. Otherwise, somehow or other, you're putting yourself in a different category. And you're not, like, you know, they may have experienced more, you know, more difficult circumstances. They may be facing more challenges, but ultimately, right, we are in the same category. We are humans. And so therefore, like, I think it's like, we really try to, you know, it's like to just limit that, like us, them thing that could make you kind of more like either like a martyr or like we're working really hard, but it's like, no, like we all need rest. We all need, right? Like, and that's as a staff, that's as a student. And, you know, we have our first person who's a full-time staff member, a director now, who was in our first group of students. So she was like, I met her when she was 12 in 2011, when we started spring. She went through the program. She's now a cohort director, right? And she's like leading now her own group. And that's like, I think, again, kind of that idea, right? It's not like there's the students, right? There's the families. It's like we have two staff members who are parents as well of students in the program. So I think, again, just kind of being like, it's, you know, not to dismiss the differences, right? I'm not going to say my experience was the same as somebody who has like lost their parents. Like, you know, I'm not saying it's the same, but we all have ultimately needs that are just as valuable. And if I'm telling them they matter, right? If I'm telling a student that I need to also act like I matter, and like we need to take care of each other. So yeah, I think that's like kind of, I guess, yeah, my 2 cents.
Yeah. And that takes us into into this kind of it's a little bit of the what are some ways that that as we work with folks that have a different culture, different language, completely different experience because of the systemic racism that exists around it. How do we learn, how do we step back, right? At times as we're working with a community and building up the leadership skills. What are some ways that we're doing that within our community? That's so important. I know that working with the indigenous community, I can't speak. I don't have, there's a lot of nuances with the Latino. We're not, a monolith. A lot of people see this face and they think Mexico, right? And so if someone is not familiar with these cultural differences, also language differences, where the indigenous person has this amazing ancestral history. They still speak Mayan, Mom, Mayan Quiche. How does Lorena, who is a mestiza, right? So I'm mixed, who speaks a language from Europe, Spanish. How do I represent? I can't do that. I can't. So I have to step back, and the leaders are the ones who we, as an organization try to build up or as organizers so that they can take leadership in this work, right? So that the indigenous community in central Mississippi, who hasn't had a voice for decades, because they've been there for decades, they own land, their children, were born here, some of their children are universities. How do I get that attention from Lorena, the executive direction, as I mentioned, to the indigenous person who has a completely different story than I? So what are some ways that we include the community in decision making, in creating a sustainable vision for the work that we're doing? And Bianca, you touched a little bit on that in that one of your, the folks that you're working hand in hand with the community, and now they have a leadership role. Our board, actually, it reflects some of our folks, our interns, we're actually working with Dartmouth, but our interns are immigrants, some children that were raised here in Mississippi. So how do we create that space where we're all building together, where we're creating leadership together, where we're creating a space for folks to be heard, because they're in a situation that that people see as vulnerable, as you mentioned, but it's because of the environment or whatever systemic things were going on in their country and now here. How do we do that? What are some ways?
Well, I probably need to come at it from a different direction also, in that groups aren't always racial and cultural. We're working with a youth group, which represent a lot of different cultures, but they are the fastest growing homeless population on the coast, and actually throughout Mississippi. Probably, we just don't know those other numbers, are homeless youth. And they don't want a bunch of old adults, even if you're 25, you're old to them, coming in and telling them what to do. We got to remember, when we were 18, we thought we knew everything too. And so the 3 organizations that we're working with, and this really doesn't go to the cultural, but it also goes to age. We formed a youth advisory board and said, you tell us what you want housing to look like and what you want things to look like. And then we're in touch with other places in the country that have already done some of this work and said, you know, what do your drop-in centers look like? Because we may think, oh, it needs to look like this, and they're going, I'm not showing up there. It looks like a bunch of old women designed it with curtains, you know. And so it's a matter of gaining the trust of the community, and that doesn't come in by you telling them what they need to be doing. That comes in through a lot of time invested, and spending time and building little relationships and seeing who the unofficial leaders are. Because you talk to,
we call it organizing.
Yeah, you talk to whatever group you're talking to, and somebody's gonna rise up that maybe not doesn't have any kind of a title, but they're moving that group in a direction.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what we all have to do, whether we're dealing with a cultural group, an age group, an ethnic group. We've got to spend enough time, and we have to be multicultural in our staff and approach also, and then let each other know. I think you can work better with this person to begin with. They're going to be more open with you than they are with me.
Yeah. So we need a little bit of time for Q&A, but I'd like to hear from Stan if you have. I don't want to leave you out of this piece, and then after Stan, we will go into Q&A.
Yeah, well, you know, our challenge has been both cultural and racial, and one thing that we try to do is, first step is be aware of the possibility that you could come in with a white savior complex. You have to be aware of that so that you can fight against it. That's number one. Number two, the main way that we try to make sure that the local voices are heard is making sure that locals are in charge of everything that we do. So for example, in Haiti, all of our medical clinics are run by Haitian doctors and nurses. Our schools are run by Haitian principals and administrators and teachers. Our building projects are done by Haitian contractors. Our churches are led by Haitian pastors. And so that's been helpful because they just know so much more about what's going on than we do. Then in the Delta, we have 3 primary leadership positions, not counting our little school in Jonestown, but our other 3 are all local people. When we started out, they were not. And the people who were leading, they did a good job. But I can tell you, having local people giving leadership and all that is better. It's not only the right thing to do, but it's practically better. Because they know the community, they've lived there all their lives, they know the culture, they know the people, and the main point of this is that having locals in leadership, and not just leadership on paper, but that can make decisions, that have the authority to make decisions, to lead out, and to help give direction, and that's one of the main ways that we try to accomplish that.
Yeah. So we have a little bit of time for Q&A. I just want to, I really appreciate Diane and Bianca and Stan. The relationship building is so important because there's nuances, you know, within all our communities that we may not understand, you know, culturally, linguistically. There's so many things. So having these conversations, understanding what are the power dynamics too that exist within our communities, and yes, and encouraging leadership building so that they can make these decisions alongside of us as we build a better Mississippi, right, collectively. So I thank you all so much for participating in this conversation. I would like to call every one of you and just get to know you all a little better. Thank you for the folks that are in the room. And Dave, of course, dear Dave, for having us and making this conversation possible. We will open it up to Q&A for about 10 minutes because Dave needs a little bit of time to do the wrap up. So thank you.
Thank you. That was great. A lot to take in, y'all. A lot. Wonderful advice. As Lorena said, the floor is open, so feel free to pop questions, comments in the chat or just in the microphone, and we'll see where this goes. Who's the brave soul to go first?
I will, Dave.
All right.
So great, you all. Thank you so much. I think the thing I have loved the most about this particular roundtable is just the utter transparency that you all have shown in talking about your challenges and how you've gotten where you are. I could particularly relate to being a transplant. I'm not from Mississippi, but man, I still get, well, who's your mama? Where'd you go to school? And you know, all of that stuff. And it's really hard in the work of nonprofit because those connections are crucial for funding, and they're crucial for, you know, all the partnerships that we have. And so that's been a real challenge for me. And so I really appreciate, you know, that topic being brought up, and then also the talking about, you know, some of the I hate to use the word stigma, but that associated with, you know, for us, the programming that we do. You know, my soft sell is we do bullying and abuse prevention programming, but the truth is we teach body autonomy, the names of body parts, and sex education to kids and families. And in Mississippi, that is a tough sell sometimes. For funders, for programming, we are overwhelmed. So balancing that, you know, the requests and the needs for people that want what we have to offer with the people that can fund what we do is a real challenge. And I love some of the ideas that Stan shared. I mean, I couldn't write fast enough about just some of those campaigns and things that you've got going on to keep a constant stream of revenue coming in instead of always having to be looking for the next, you know, big thing. So I just appreciate everything that was shared. I just thought it was a terrific group, and having Lorena moderate was just perfect. So great job, Dave, for putting this one together. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, I'll definitely second that. This is one of the things that I love about being able to talk with people while being vulnerable and being, you know, honest, is sometimes there's a fear of what happens if you are, you know, too open, too honest, and yet, you know, there are shared challenges or shared insight that hopefully people can gain and learn from each other, and sort of, you know, to humanize people, right? I think as you get into certain echelons, you know, your name sort of carries a certain weight, and all of a sudden, you know, you sort of start to see people more than just a human being who goes through the same challenges and the same frustrations as everybody else. And so I really appreciate that. Sandy, did you, I see you are on cam and on mic.
Yes, I want to thank you, especially you, Dave, for having this. Look, nothing like a webinar to be able to get a little elliptical time in while the webinar is going on. So I apologize for turning my camera off for a little while. Thanks for all the great information. I tell you, I come from the standpoint of a funder. I am a grant maker out of the Meridian. I represent the Charles L. Young Senior Foundation out of Meridian. And we are faced with I'm faced with a new challenge of actually having to be on the opposite side of the table in trying to start a group for the 2 school districts in that area. So I laughed at the comment that Stan made. I heard myself being the great white hope when speaking with, sorry, that's hilarious, I know. But look, when speaking with the 2 groups that I was trying to get to work together and trying to say, why won't you take this money from me and the Hardin Foundation? We're trying to help you, you know, and I appreciate that comment. I do have also a comment on the fundraising comment that was brought up. I tell you what, you guys are doing fantastic work, all of you, Brianka, Dana, and Stan. I tell you, and you're coming from different standpoints of view. And I wish I was in different areas to be able to help you guys. Most of our funding is in the Meridian area. But the comment that Stan made concerning correspondence with organizations that offer funding, and I once again I speak from the standpoint of a funder for over 20 years now. Groups that we receive correspondence from, at least on a quarterly basis, particular one colorful, look, ones that, this is our new museum going up in Meridian, which we are a proud sponsor of, the Children's Museum there. Yes, it helps. And yes, as chairperson, I make sure that all correspondence is listed in our quarterly meeting minutes. But as a added tip, if you would make sure that the individual board members also receive the correspondence and not just the chairperson, which I get them all, but the individual board members. We've had 2 incidents within the last 18 months, this being one of them, the Children's Museum one. We donated a substantial amount of money to them, and one of our board members actually did this, match that donation personally because they received the correspondence. That's also happened with the Meridian High School boys basketball team. One of our board members is an avid high school basketball fan, and they are on our annual list like the Children's Museum is, and they match that donation because they receive regular correspondence. And so as a suggestion, that might be helpful. Thank you.
I'll ask a question. So there's, as a former math teacher and someone who gets absolute joy out of seeing a spreadsheet, which I know makes me an anomaly, you know, how do you manage to fit in the things that, if you had the time to do the data analysis, not only could help you, but might highlight things that you maybe didn't see before, or survey or that kind of thing, but it's one of those tertiary components, right? It's not your QuickBooks getting the payroll done. It's not supporting people direct service on the ground. How do you find the time to infuse those additional elements that could make you stronger, that could help you get informed, but that you just might not have the capacity or the time to do? You know, have you all ever sort of faced that conundrum of, I'm just trying to get the basic stuff done. I don't have the time to do, I'd love to, but I don't have the time to do spreadsheets and surveys and all kinds of fancy things. Is that something that you all have faced before or manage?
Well, I would say that 2 things we're talking about: money and funding, and this is not directly addressed. I want to say, when we got to the point, I was mainly for years the only person. I mean, I was raising all the money, right, and everybody else is spending it. That's kind of how that worked. And so when we decided we needed a development director, all right, and so, but that's a risk, right? Because what happens if you get a development director, they're not going to have checks rolling in their first week, their 5th day, right? But you're going to have to pay them that first month, but they've got to develop those relationships, and their checks that they're generating may not come for 5 months, right, at the earliest. So what I did was I went out and raised with some donors of ours 4 months of their salary. In fact, and I'll just tell you, I did 1 month myself. That's how important I thought it was. And so I knew that gave us a 4-month runway, right? That gave us a 4-month runway that they didn't have to bring in money. But it may be the 5th or 6th month they don't bring any money, right? The 7th month, you're taking a chance. But we took the chance. And I will tell you, she paid off the kudos. This woman that we hired was fantastic. She's a go-getter. And so that's made, I would just say, if you ever get to that point where you can do a development director, I highly recommend it if you get the right person. So yeah, that's all I have on that.
Yeah, it's so hard, you know, when you don't have when you don't have a huge staff, when you are doing everything. With us, and I know that Sandy spoke from the viewpoint of a funder, but it was extremely difficult for us to get funding. And I'm going to speak on a national panel regarding that, because a lot of the organizations that receive the funding are large organizations. You know, they got a couple $1 million on some of the work that we did, some of the organizing work. And none of the leaders look like me, right? The folks, the executive director. which is why Dave and I, we started this conversation, right? We were looking for other immigrant or other Latino executive directors. So it's extremely difficult to be able to use your creativity in those ways, Dave, because we are answering, you know, all these, like you said, the basics right now. The funding is not easy. Even being able to build a data with folks to provide us with funding, that's a task that will fall to me or my deputy, but we are answering emergencies daily. So we're building and, you know, and organizing at the same time. And, you know, we are engaged in conversations with funders where hopefully they'll able to see that sometimes we do need some startup money to be able to, you know, get on our feet when you're doing this kind of work here in Mississippi as an immigrant, where you're the unicorn, you know, but knowing that our work is just as valuable.
I would say with us, we all wear so many different hats. I'm very blessed that our associate director, who is actually over one of our agencies, but also has a development past with another organization. So she's bringing knowledge to us, but I will admit, we're so busy right now that we've got to adjust schedules and things like that, and it's a constant struggle, but it's one that we all deal with, and we will. And it's also part of the growth spurts that comes at times and then settles down.
Okay, everybody, it is 11:24. I think we have time for one more comment or question. Bianca, were you unmuting yourself to say something?
I was just gonna say we've started to try to set aside a specific time for more like big picture kind of thinking each week. So like Monday in the afternoon, like, you know, staff meetings and stuff are in the morning, but kind of just, and again, of course, things still can come up, but like just trying to be like, we're gonna have at least that 1 hour where I'm supposed to be thinking more along the lines of more strategic, a little bit more removed. So yeah, kind of out of the same, like just the realization, like, yeah, it's always you're going, but it's like, you need to see some of this other stuff.
Absolutely. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Okay. So it's 11:25. So I think we'll call it there. Feel free to message and I can connect you to our presenters if you have more comments, questions, or things you want to discuss with them. Thank you all of our presenters and our moderator Lorena for being here. Diane, Bianca, Stan, Lorena. This is exactly what this was supposed to be, and I so appreciate you taking the time, being generous with your time, given that we just spent an hour and a half talking about how crazy it can be. And so the fact that you took the time out of a Wednesday morning and for Stan on your vacation, it really does, it means a lot, and I hope that this encourages others to be willing to be vulnerable and have these conversations and to engage in them, because I think there's camaraderie in shared experiences, and while it is lonely at the top, it doesn't always have to be a silo. So we hope that this encourages you to be a part of the team and join us as the Alliance to connect. So thank you all. The October training and event calendar went out this week. If you haven't seen it already, check out our website. We have tons of great things. And our next Executive Director Roundtable in a month from now, which I'm sure will feel like 2 minutes, is going to be with a focus on executive directors who are men of color. So another very powerful dialogue and conversation. And so I hope that you will take the time to join us for that. Thank you all of our participants, and y'all be safe, be well, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.